we're going to start the beginning of the Seerah in week 2. This time I brought my marker, so just have an easier time writing. Where does the story of the Seerah take place? Anybody? Where does it take geographically?
Sorry. So if you look at the Seerah, like the first 13 years of the Prophet's life takes place in Mecca.
Very good. And where is Mecca? Saudi Arabia. And where is Saudi Arabia?
Middle East.
Okay. Very specifically, it's called Jazirat al-Arab. Okay. I call it the boot because it looks like a boot.
Arabian Peninsula.
The Arabian Peninsula, right? Now, the Arabian Peninsula is located. It is the dead zone of Asia, right? Nothing of consequence really ever exists here until they find oil. Before that, there's no really any resources of any consequence here, right? So to the west of the Arabian Peninsula, what is there?
Africa.
And specifically, what empire is in the west?
Abyssinian Empire.
Okay, northwest.
Byzantine Empire.
Yes, exactly, the Romans, right? So you have the Romans here, and what exists to the east? Persia, right? The Persians. And the Persians and the Romans have been fighting. Let's draw swords. Oh, never mind, I can't draw swords. Whatever, it works. They've been fighting for, at this point, 600 years, right? We're looking at around 500 and somewhere between 60 and 80 AD. We call it CE now, right? Because we're trying to be politically correct. What does AD stand for?
Anno Domini.
Anno Domini, which means?
After the birth of Christ.
The year of our Lord, right? That's what it means.
Yeah,
but what does CE mean?
After Common Era.
It's Common Era, all right? Now, why do we call it CE and not AD? It's like me going up to my Honda, taking the H off, and being like, it's not a Honda anymore. Same concept. So, around 560 AD, right, is what we're looking at. The Romans and the Persians have been fighting for about 600 years at this point. 600 years at this point, okay? Very importantly, there is a plague that hits the both empires around 450. This is known as the plague of Justinian, okay? The plague of Justinian decimates the Roman Empire and then travels from the Roman Empire to the Persians and destroys the Persian Empire as well. All right, like by the time the plague of Justinian is done, about 1/5 of the populations of both empires have died. Then there is a series of incredible, catastrophic environmental events that take place in both the Persian and the Roman empires, which destroy much of the infrastructure, destroy a lot of the agricultural areas. Basically, both empires have been destroyed by disease and environmental effects. Okay, there's also like a mini ice age that happens in this area in this time, and both empires during that whole time are fighting as well. They're constantly fighting as well. So, historically speaking, the Arabian Peninsula, which is a dead zone where nothing happens, right? Because here you have fertile land here, you have fertile land here, and you have nothing here, absolutely nothing. And the Arabian Peninsula, which has been a dead zone, because it's a dead zone, it's safe from the plague. And because it's a dead zone, and because it's so arid and so hot, many of the floods and things like that don't really touch the Arabian Peninsula either. So what you end up happening, very interestingly, is it's as if the world has been prepared for the coming of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. because the two primary opponents that will be there for the Muslims after the coming of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam have been weakened to the point where they really have very difficult time resisting. And so it's as if the world is being prepared for the coming of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there are other kind of signs that come as well. So, for example, the Persians. What do the Persians worship?
The sun.
Yes. I'm sorry.
The religion of Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism, right? And the symbol of God for them is the sun, right? The sun is really its light, and so the sun is a symbol, and the fire is a symbol. And so in their grand temple, they have a fire that's a perpetual fire. They constantly have, like, it has to be continuously kept up. And it's been burning for about 200 years at this point. This fire's been burning 200 years in their grand temple. The fire goes out. There are many like these different small little signs that there's the coming of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There is one of the major signs of the coming of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is alluded to in the Quran. It's called Surah Al-Fil, right? We all know Surah Al-Fil. And there is a king in Yemen. Okay? Now, I said this is the dead zone, right? But there are actually areas around the Arabian Peninsula that are very active. Very, very active. And one of them is Yemen. Why is Yemen active? What's so big about Yemen? Anybody?
Can you repeat it?
Like, what's so important about Yemen? Why is Yemen, this Yemen area, why does it have so much activity, whereas the rest of the Arabian Peninsula is basically a dead zone?
Because it's next to the ocean or sea.
It's right next to the ocean. And everybody that is on this side of the world, everybody wants what? Spices. Everybody wants spices, and there are one of the only sapphire and ruby mines is in India. The spices are in India. A lot of different fruits are in India. So Yemen is a massive trade center. It's a massive trade center because Yemeni ships go to India, get the stuff, come back to Yemen, and then go north from Yemen to Syria. And then from Syria, it goes west. Okay, so Yemen is one of the major ports where India is accessed from. Yemen and Ethiopia here. Now this king, there's a king here named Abraha. Abraha wants to monopolize all Arabian trade in Yemen. Okay? He wants to monopolize all of Arabian trade in Yemen. But there's a major problem about him monopolizing all Arabian trade, is that every year there is what? Every year the Arabs do what? Hajj. Every year the Arabs go for Hajj. And you have to remember, the Arabs were polytheists, but they still were coming from the tradition of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so there were many practices of Ibrahim alayhi salam that they kept up. And one of the practices that they kept up was Hajj. And so all the Arabs used to congregate in this one city. They used to send delegations to this one city, and it was not just a major religious event where they would do the Hajj. It was also a major commercial event. And it was also a major cultural event. So the best poets would go for Hajj, and they'd have rap battles. And the best traders would go to Hajj, and they would make a pretty penny off of it. By the way, this tradition of like Hajj being like lots of trade happening at Hajj, this is thousands of years old. Thousands of years old. So the idea that like Hajj is being commercialized today, Hajj was always commercialized. Hajj was always a commercial event. And in fact, there are rulings as to like what you can buy and sell and how you buy and sell during Hajj because of the fact everybody recognizes a commercial event as well. And so a lot of the trade that was happening here was congregating around Mecca, because, not just because Mecca was right in the middle of the trade routes, but also because Mecca had the Kaaba. And the Kaaba was facilitating a lot of that trade. So what does Abraha want to do? Abraha's like, well, okay, if I make my own Kaaba, right, maybe I can attract the Arabs to here and we can monopolize more of the trade. Unfortunately, when he builds the Kaaba, when he builds his grand temple, nobody comes. They don't come because they are far more dedicated to their tradition of going to Mecca. So, very sensibly, Abraha decides he's going to destroy the Kaaba. And when you destroy the Kaaba, then there creates a religious vacuum. Guess who's got the next big temple, right? We'll bring people over, monopolize commercial trade in Yemen. And so Abraha gets elephants from India. By the way, Indian elephants are huge. Indian elephants are massive. Like you have the African elephants, like the baby elephants. You go to India, they've got huge elephants. So like, what? Let me put it in this perspective. When Hannibal marched on Rome, he brought African elephants. And they were so powerful that he destroyed entire legions with about 10 elephants. Okay? African elephants are about half the size of Indian elephants. And Indian elephants are far stronger and far more powerful. I'm not just saying that as like a Desi nationalist, but like, really, like Indian elephants are just super cool. And they can also be trained incredibly. I'm gonna go off on an elephant. They can be trained incredibly. So like, there was a Mughal emperor named Akbar who loved elephants, right? He was also a bit blasphemous, but his name was Akbar, and on his coins he had them write Allahu Akbar as a kind of pun, which is terrible, but whatever. But he had this. He created this capital city out of the middle of nowhere called Fatehpur Sikri, and the gates were not able to be opened by humans. They could only be opened by elephants, who would grab the handles with their trunks and pull it open. Because elephants can be trained to do crazy things. But anyways, enough about elephants. So he brought these Indian elephants over to Yemen, and he marches on Mecca. When they arrive to here, the Quraysh are like, this is the most powerful man in the peninsula. He's got a huge army, and he's got elephants. And we have no idea how to deal with elephants. And so there's a small clash, and Abraha wipes the floor with the Arabs, and that's close to Ta'if, and he starts marching towards Mecca. Now, when he gets close to the valley, the grandfather of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, Abdul Muttalib, he goes. One of the soldiers of Abraha steals his camels. So he goes to Abraha and he asks him. He's like, "Look, I want my camels back." And he starts negotiating for his camels. And Abraha looks at him and says, "I'm coming to destroy the house of your God. And you're more concerned about the camels?" Abdul Muttalib says, "The camels are mine, the house is God's. So I'm going to negotiate for what's mine, and Allah will protect what's his." And so Abdul Muttalib, he gets his camels, he goes back. Abraha, his entire army is destroyed. And is destroyed by birds. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends birds that are holding these rocks in their beaks, and they pelt the elephants until the elephants die. Each one of these things is like almost like a comet coming down on the elephant. It takes him out. And this is the surah in the Quran, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. Have you not seen what your Lord did with the people of the elephants? And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is born in that year. Asterisk. Okay. Remember we talked about opinions and different opinions last time, right? So some say that he was born in the year of the elephant. Some say he was born after the year of the elephant by like a certain amount of years. But the year of the elephant is associated with the birth of the Rasul. So the Rasul is born around that year of the elephant. And very importantly, the Rasul is an orphan. His father passes away. So his mother is from Yathrib. So here's Mecca. Here's what later is called Medina, right? But during that time is called what? Yathrib. His mother is from Yathrib. So when he Abdullah, his father, is coming back from Yathrib with his mother, and Yathrib is very famous for his disease. It's very famous for a fever that you get sick with that fever, you're done. And so he catches that fever in Yathrib, and by the time they get back, he dies. And so, but his mother is still expecting with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is where we're going to get to our real first story, right? Because we're going to cover 4 stories today, and each one of these stories is going to have a lesson that we're going to extrapolate from the story for our own lives. This is where we get to our first story, okay? Our first story is a story of Halima Sa'diyya. And the Arabs had a tradition where the Arabs of the cities had a tradition where they wouldn't raise their children for the first 2 to 5 years of their life inside the city. Okay? They believed that the Bedouins had better Arabic, that the desert had, or the rural areas didn't have polluted air, and that the Bedouins had better morals. And so what they would do is when babies were born, they would hand those babies to midwives. A midwife is somebody who takes care of and feeds the child for you. So they would hand the babies over to midwives. And they would pay the midwives based on their economic status. So best midwife, richest baby, right? Not as great midwife, not as great babies. Like, it's very economically stratified, right? So Halima Sa'diyya, radhiyallahu anha, she's from a family, or her family is not that well to do. For example, she comes into Mecca riding an emaciated donkey. Okay? Emaciated meaning you can see its ribs, basically, right? Like really weak, slow, limping donkey. Everybody else is like coming in on their horses and camels, and she's like on her limping, emaciated donkey. She says that she had just had a baby, and her own son would not really be able, would cry all night because he was so hungry. But she couldn't make enough milk because they didn't have, it was a time of famine. It was a time of, when the rain doesn't come, what's it called? Drought. It was a time of a drought, right? There wasn't enough vegetation to feed the sheep. And they depended on the milk of the sheep. And so the sheep didn't have milk, meaning she didn't have milk, meaning the kid was hungry and they were hungry. It was a bad situation. And she was like, okay, maybe I go to Mecca and I get some of these kids that I can foster, right? And things will be better for me. So she comes, she goes on her emaciated, limping donkey into Mecca. And this donkey is in such a bad shape that she arrives after everybody else, right? And she's not in that great of a shape either. But there is this orphan boy who has been born, whose name is Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And nobody wants the orphan boy. Nobody wants the orphan boy. Why does nobody want the orphan boy? Anybody?
Because she won't be paid.
She won't be paid, right? You can't really, no father, depending on the grandfather, and Abdul Muttalib wasn't so well-to-do anymore, and the mother. Like, there's no expectation of really any payment. And so everybody skips on this orphan boy, including Halima Sa'diyah. She skips on it. She's like, I got an emaciated donkey. I got to get some money out of this. And so she's about to leave, and she says to her husband, I don't want to leave the orphan behind. I don't want to leave the orphan behind. And her husband says, you know, you're right. We shouldn't leave that kid just because he's an orphan. Maybe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will bless us for taking care of an orphan. And so she goes back, she takes the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam as a baby and starts to go back. Suddenly this emaciated donkey is just going, right? He's gone from like a 1991 Corolla to like a Ferrari. And he's just zooming back. And Halima Sa'diyah is like, whoa, right? Like, well, what happened to you? And she gets home, and she starts nursing the baby, and all of a sudden she has milk. And she has so much milk that the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam drinks. And her own baby, who had been crying the entire time because he didn't have enough milk, he drinks to his full. And then her husband goes to milk the equally emaciated sheep and finds that they have milk. And so he fills the containers with milk, brings it back, and both her and her husband drink to their full, and for the first time in a long time, everybody goes to sleep full. And these kinds of events keep happening around her, right? The water starts coming, the drought ends, there's enough for the sheep to graze, you know, there's just food, and they can tell that this is all because of this baby. And it gets to the point where he's 2 years old, and customarily they wean at 2, and then they send the babies back. They go back to Bibi Amna, right? They go back to Mecca, and they don't want to give the baby back. It's like we finally have some level of food, some level of rizq in our lives, and we can tell it's because of the baby. And so they convince his mother, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they convince her to allow him to stay until he's about 4 or 5 years old. And the whole time they have now more kids coming in, and that brings them more money, and there's a bunch of them, and it becomes kind of like a very healthy atmosphere from what was a very impoverished situation previously. And this is our first lesson from the Seerah of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that is a hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That is, have mercy on those who are on the earth, and the one who is in the sky will have mercy on you. Irham man fil ardi yarhamukum man fis sama. And have mercy on the people of this earth, and Allah will have mercy on you. There's another hadith very close to it. There's al-khalqu iyalullah. That all of creation are like dependents of Allah. وَأَحَبُّ إِلَيْهِمْ أَنْفَعُهُمْ لِعِيَالِهِ. And the most beloved to Allah are the ones who are of most benefit to His dependents. The lesson we get from this story of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Halima Sa'diyah radiallahu anha is that there are those that you look at in this world, there are those you see in this world, and you know 100% doing good to this person is going to have absolutely no benefit to me. There are people in this world, you look at them, you're like, and this is, by the way, this is the difference between rahmah and mahabba. Okay? Love love can be for anybody. It can be for people who benefit you, people who don't benefit you. People who can do good for you, people who can't do good for you. Rahmah is doing good for somebody who can do absolutely nothing for you. And this is why Allah is Ar-Rahman. Because nobody can do anything for Allah. Nobody can do anything for Allah. And yet, you have everything you have from Allah. And so, this goes back to that hadith, Irham man fil ardi yarhamukum man fis sama. That have mercy on those on this earth. Have mercy, do things for people that can do nothing for you. And Allah will do the same for you. And so Halima Sa'adiyya, radiallahu anha, she felt this mercy for this orphan child. She had no idea this orphan child was the greatest of creation. She had no idea this orphan child was rahmatan lil alamin. All she knew was that this is an orphan child. And I can't leave an orphan child behind simply because he can't pay me. And so she did good for him, and Allah brought good for her. So think about in your daily lives the kinds of people that can do absolutely no good for you, and what responsibility you have from Allah towards them. This is our first story. This is the story of Halima Sa'adiyya. The second story is when the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we're gonna skip a kind of important story because we're focusing. The important thing is, we made this clear on the first day. The important thing is not just to tell stories from the life of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but to tell stories from which we can gain lessons for our daily lives, to make us better people, to make us better Muslims. So there's a couple of stories that are like very famous that we're going to skip, simply because there are other stories that have much more applicability in our lives. So the next story we're going to go to is the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam now is about, at 6, his mother passes away, and he's given to his grandfather. At 9, his grandfather passes away, and he's given to his uncle. But at this point, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is in Mecca, and there's a wedding. There's a big wedding, the whole shebang. They've got the multiple days and the Bollywood dance choreography and all of that, right? Big wedding. And one of his friends says to him, let's go check out the wedding. And on the way, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam falls asleep. He says that an incredible fatigue overcomes him, and he falls asleep. Now, Arab weddings, pre-Islamic Jahili Arab weddings, are not your normal wedding affair, right? Especially the big weddings. Like, imagine every kind of fahisha that you can imagine. That happens at a wedding. Any kind of horrible act that you can imagine takes place as part of the celebration of these weddings. Okay? So when they want to go check out the wedding, right? It's not like, let's go and eat the biryani, right? Invite ourselves to a little bit of maqluba. No, that's not the wedding. The wedding is like, it is a convention of sin. And so his friend says, let's go. And the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is on his way, and an immense fatigue overtakes him, and he falls asleep. And when he wakes up, it's the next day and the wedding's over. Right? I mean, he's been sleeping for a while. Just knocked out. And there are many such instances where the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam is about to be exposed, or is about to be exposed by his society to haram, exposed by his society to immense fahisha, to corruption, to degradation of moral values, and he falls asleep, or he becomes unconscious, or something like that. And in this, there's a lesson for us, right? Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bring incredible sleep and have him knock out for a day rather than go that way? Can anybody imagine? Like, anybody give me, just toss out ideas.
Because I think maybe in my opinion, I don't know if this is true or not, because Allah has chosen him as always as a prophet, so Allah doesn't want him to be exposed to this kind of like sins, you know, and stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah, I've also like heard another incident, I don't know if it's true, like there was like a ceremony that is held every year when they go to worship the idols, and he also doesn't go to the ceremony.
Yes, this is one of them. There's another one where they're going to carry things, and he doesn't have anything to carry something with, and so his uncle says, okay, you know, use your loincloth. And so he starts to, and then he becomes unconscious. There are many of these kinds of incidents that happen early in his life. But okay, exposure, exposing himself, or keeping the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam from exposing himself to the fahisha. Fahisha is like corruption, degradation, moral degradation, things like that. What else? Abdullah.
So that when he doesn't see the Risala, no one can accuse him of saying like, oh, you were at this, and you did this, and I saw you do this.
Good.
When you were 20.
Maintains his character. This is English, I promise. Anybody else? Any ideas? Why is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protecting him from these kinds of experiences?
Maybe because like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala needed him to keep himself pure, so when he gets the revelation, he can understand the revelation to the full sense.
Okay,
also
keep pure.
for the reason that when he was a kid with Halima, like two angels came and then they washed his heart, you know.
That's taking it out of him,
Yeah, and then,
right? But then the question is that, okay, once that's already been taken out, why is there's also a protection from the outside as well? Right, that's a protection from the inside, and there's a protection from the outside. So, anybody on the, yes?
I'm thinking if he's going to be an example for the rest of the Muslims, he has to be away from some, you know, so that's my understanding. So otherwise protect, because Allah knows the future, He wants to protect, you know, save him from doing such and such, so that he will be the example for the Ummah later on.
Good, that's also a good one. And the correct answer is all of it, right? It's all of it. These are all benefits that are coming out of it. That it is keeping the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam from being exposed to fahisha, right? It is maintaining his character, because his character is going to be very important throughout the entire story. His character is entirely and completely unimpeachable. Nobody can say anything about his character, ever. From when he was a very small kid, everybody knew this was the best kid you ever seen in your life. To when he was, even his greatest enemies, you know, the best way you know that your enemies, that you're nice, like a good guy, is when your haters will say whatever. When it comes time to trust somebody, they're like, you know what, I trust you. So Abu Jahl, for example, Abu Jahl used to leave his things with the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, even when he was cursing him, because he knew he was the most trustworthy. Right? So his character was unimpeachable, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. He was being kept pure, right? And he was being made like, we knew he was going to be the example, and so he was going to be an example even as a child. But let's bring this back to us. Right, let's bring this back to us. What does this tell us about exposing ourselves to fahisha? What does this tell us about exposing ourselves to fahisha? And the importance of keeping ourselves from exposing ourselves to fahisha. Right? Exposure over time normalizes. Exposure normalizes. This is why you have the buzzword representation, right? Everybody wants representation, because the idea is if you represent a group of people continuously, It normalizes their existence. And it's the same thing with fahisha. The first time you see somebody passed out drunk, you might be like, whoa. The second time, the third time, the fourth time, it's a Friday night. No, the fourth time, the fifth time, you just kind of, step over them. The first time makes you stop. The third, the fourth, the fifth time, you're like, okay, if I go around that way, I can get past all the vomit and stuff, right? That's the thing about exposure. Exposure normalizes. And normalization is the first step to indulgence. Because the first time you are shocked, then when something becomes normalized, and maybe it's not that bad. And then maybe it's not that bad, somebody goes, hey, why don't you try it? You're like, no, maybe it's not that bad. Okay, why don't I give it a go? Exposure is the first step to indulgence. And secondly, the second thing for us, right, is if you want to maintain your character, you don't want to be in places where people of good character will turn around and be like, why were you there, bro? We all know circles, groups, right? Everybody knows this group is into that, this group is into that, this group is into that, right? Everybody knows. And so, if your friends see you hanging out with those guys who are into that, bro, why are we hanging out with them? And then, even if you weren't doing it, even if you weren't involved in it, you got the stench on your clothes. And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he has this hadith where he says that good company is like keeping company with a perfume seller. Even if you're not making the perfume, your clothes smell good. And bad company is like being next to the guy who's blacksmithing, right? We would consider it more like coal mining now, right? Even if you are not involved in it, you still smell like secondhand smoke. And so, people of character, their character rubs off on you, depending on the company you keep. So, you have exposure and you have character. And the last one is, what example are you going to set for your kids? Okay, you're like, okay, you know what? I'll do this now. And then when I'm 20, 25, 26, I get married. I'll have kids. I'll start going to the masjid. And I won't go clubbing. I won't hang out with my friends at the bar. Then I'll be serious. But then what are you going to tell your kids? Your son or your daughter walks up to you, says, Dad, I want to go, my friends are going to get together at the bar. Or my friends are going to get together at the club. You're like, no. Yeah, but you did that when you were a kid. What you going to say? What are you going to say? Yes, but I was a terrible child. So, these are all things that apply to us entirely. If we want, right, this is one of the examples of even as a child, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protecting him, is an example for us. That we have to protect ourselves from exposing ourselves to fahisha. Exposing ourselves to things that desensitize haram. That normalize haram. Making sure the stench, the secondhand smoke of hell isn't coming from our clothes. And so that we can be examples for our own kids when we grow older. I mean, do you want to be the example of, yes, I did all that, but you shouldn't, so that you don't end up like me? Or do you want to be the example of, I didn't do it, and so the fact that I didn't do it is proof that you don't have to do it either. So those are two stories that we've done so far. What time is Maghrib? 6:48. Okay. So we'll go for another few minutes, and then we'll break for Maghrib, then we'll come back. The last thing that I want to touch on this is the idea of rahmah. Right? When we come back, we're going to talk about the marriage of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, his first marriage, to Khadija radhiyallahu anha, and we're going to talk about how he, the Hilf al-Fudul, which is coalition for social justice, basically. But what we're, right now, what we're going to talk about is this idea of rahmah, of Allah. And that, don't think that everything is achieved by worldly means. That I'm going to work hard, I'm going to make the right strategy, I'm going to do everything proper, and then I will get everything that I worked for. That's not how the world works. I've read enough history, and I've listened to enough successful people to know that any kind of everything that happens in this world happens like a forest fire. Okay? A forest fire can start by a lightning strike. But there are two elements to a forest fire. If you have 1,000 lightning strikes at the same spot in the Amazon, you're never getting a forest fire. Why? Why are you never getting a forest fire in the Amazon? No matter how many lightning strikes you get.
Because there's nothing.
What's your name, bro?
It's a rainforest.
It's a rainforest, right? Everything's wet. Even if a fire starts, there's a river. There's never going to be a forest fire in the Amazon unless it's like really dry. But you get like somebody just smokes a cigarette and throws it in California, and the whole state goes up in flames, right? Why is that? Because everything's dry, right? It's incredibly dry. There's constantly droughts, right? The whole place is just, it's ready for a fire. The world works like a forest fire, which is, there are two components to it. There's a dry field and there's lightning strikes. Drying the field is your job. The lightning strike is a loss. All the means you put in the world, right, to dry the field, unless there's a lightning strike, there's no forest fire. And there can be 1,000 lightning strikes. If the field's not dry, there's no forest fire. Your job is to dry the field. And it's Allah's job to send the lightning. And when we talk about the story of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, what we've seen is the world is dry at this point. The empires have been weakened. There's no real power in this area. There are a series of things that have happened that have set the world up. The world is dry. And then the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam comes as the lightning strike. So in your life, right, pursue every means. But remember that lightning strikes come from Allah. Lightning strikes come from Allah. You talk to enough successful people and they will tell you about their lightning strikes. Lightning strikes come from Allah. And the way that you seek those lightning strikes is things like dua, things like tawakkul, and things like be merciful to the people of the world. Irham man fil ard. Be merciful to the people of the world. Yarhamukum man fis sama. The one who is, Allah will be merciful on you. So that's one of the major lessons that we're going to grab from the first couple of stories. When we come back, we're going to grab two more lessons. One on what to look for when you get married, or we're looking to get married. Everybody's has popped up. And then the second is the responsibility of people of faith, people of iman, people of ihsan, people of akhlaq towards the world around them. All right, let's break for a while. Coming back, so we're going to talk about the most important story, and that's the marriage of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And it's important because it's extremely relevant for all of you. Now, I have to say this. I say this to young people all the time, which is, some of y'all ain't thinking about getting married. Right? Some of y'all are like, oh, you know, when it happens, and whatnot. I just want to be really straight with you. Start thinking about it. When you're like 21, 22. From my experience, what I've seen in the community, is 22, 24, and 26. Those are the 3 spots where people get married. Right? 22 is right out of college, right? 24 is you had a couple of years of experience in your life after college, and you're like, okay, now I'm ready to get married. 26, you're about to make that career move, and right around that time you get married. After 26, you start going up the shelf on the aisle. You know, like you go to the grocery aisle, right? And there's like people on the top shelf. There's like items on the top shelf, and then there's items in the middle. Once you hit 26, that's when you start to move it up the shelves. Okay? When you get to my age, you're in the storage. Okay?
Back to the house.
So, all marriages are lightning strikes. All marriages are lightning strikes. But you got to dry the field. You got to dry the field. So be very serious about it. And you know, if you get married through college, good for you. If you get married through work, good for you. Because marriage is good. Marriage is important. Marriage is good. So, setting that up, we're going to talk about the marriage of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Okay? The Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was a trader. Not traitor, trader. Okay? Merchant. He was a merchant. And he was a merchant from a very young age. When his grandfather took him to Syria, right? We looked at the trade map here, right? This was a major trade route where things come in from India to Yemen. They go from Yemen to Mecca, they go from Mecca to Syria. Okay, it's a major trade route. And so the Quraysh used to go in the winter to Yemen, grab the stuff, and then in the summer they would go to Syria and sell the stuff. And then they would come back. And so the Rasul ﷺ went on multiple of these trips with his grandfather, with his grandfather's uncle as well, to these areas, and then he became experienced at it. Now, there was an entrepreneur lady whose name was Khadija. Okay? And she was the richest woman in Mecca. It's not always saying much in Mecca because the women weren't really all that well to do. They didn't have wealth because they often didn't receive inheritance. There were no inheritance laws. It's not that women didn't get inheritance. It's that there weren't inheritance laws in the sense that, okay, a woman gets this much and a man gets that much. It was like, dad's dying, he's like, I give my daughter some money. And then he dies. Right? So you give the daughter some money. And if he doesn't say that, she doesn't get any money. So it wasn't common for women to get money through inheritance. And also women weren't in employment either. So it was uncommon for women to have a lot of money. Khadija radiallahu anha had a lot of money. And there's some disagreement whether it came from her first husband or it came from her father, but you know, it's one of the two. And so she has a lot of money, and this is, every business major knows this, it takes money to make money, right? It takes money to make money. So, middle class people buy houses, rich people invest, right? So Khadija radiallahu anha, she was investing. She was investing in business. And what she would do, because, you know, she's not going to go up to Syria, right? for many reasons. One, she's a woman, and most of the caravans are all male, so it's just not safe. Two, you know, you reach like this point in your wealth where like you can pay people to do this stuff for you, and that's the point she had reached in her wealth. And so what she would do is she would invest in the caravan, invest in the goods, and then have people sell for commission, right? Like used car salesman, right? Everything's on commission. And so she had heard that the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was an incredible businessman, and he was very honest. And so she hired him to be her salesperson in Syria, to manage the whole enterprise, as it were. And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam goes with the caravan to Syria. And in Syria, he's incredibly honest. He's very, very trustworthy with the money that, you know, she's given him. Because, I mean, think about it, right? There's no VPNs, right? Like nowadays when you're working from home, what they make you do, log into a VPN, through a VPN, right? So there ain't no VPNs, right? There's no security cameras on the camels, right? She can't see what he's doing. She sent one of her servants with him so that she can keep an eye on what's going on. And at the end of the day, you know, you slip a little bit here and a little bit there, and all of a sudden you can buy people out. But the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is incredibly trustworthy with her money. And he's incredibly trustworthy with the people he's selling to. He's just incredibly moral on both ends. And he's a really good businessman. So he makes tons of money. He makes tons of money and he comes back. And this is like the best trip she's ever had to Syria. Like she's ever sent to Syria, right? And she's amazed. She's like, wow, you brought back a lot of money. And then her servant that she sent with the caravan starts telling her about, you know, about how honest he is, about how honest he is with her money, how honest he is with the customers. And she's really intrigued. And so she decides that she wants to ask him if he's interested in marrying her. And so she sends a proposal through her servant. And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right, she's a widow, but she's very rich. She's very well connected, and she's about 15 years older than them. There's some disagreement whether she's 3 years older than him or 15 years older than him. But it's one of those two. She's either 3 years older than him or 15 years older than him. The majority opinion is that she was 15 years older than him. So she was 40, he was 25. And she asked him if he wanted to marry her. And the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he took the matter back to his uncles, and they all agreed this was a really good offer. And she was known for her excellent character and her excellent morals, and just being an awesome person. And so the two of them got married. And all of his children were born from Khadija, except for one, Ibrahim. There's quite a few lessons in this. Quite a few lessons in this for us ourselves, right? And particularly for y'all. And the most important lesson in this is there's an ayah in the Quran, الخبيثات للخبيثين والخبيثون للخبيثات والطيبات للطيبين والطيبون للطيبات. That horrible men are for horrible women, and horrible women are for horrible men. And good men are for good women, and good women are for good men. If you want to marry somebody good, be good yourself. If you want to marry somebody who is of good character, has iman, has akhlaq, has really good morals, then be a person of good morals yourself. if you want to marry somebody of good Islam, be a person of good Islam yourself. Don't go clubbing on Friday nights and Saturday nights and find someone that's open on Sunday nights and go there too. And then turn around and be like, you know, I want a muhajjaba. I want somebody very pure. She's ever had a boyfriend, la hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. Right? And flip side as well. Real talk. I knew this guy who married this like muhajjaba and ended up getting divorced in 2 months because she would go clubbing every night. Or every weekend night. But like, it's on the flip side as well. Right? Actually, it's a really bizarre story, but that was the highlight of it. But if you want to marry somebody that is has good character, then have good character. Because this is one of the strange things about attraction. Okay, everybody talks about attraction. There is most people really massively misunderstand what attraction is. There's like a baseline of physical attraction, and after that, everything is morals and personality. After that, everything is morals and personality. You can find the most beautiful looking person in the world, and within 10 minutes, you're like, I would die before marrying this person. Because they're just, horrible akhlaq. They have horrible manners, they have horrible etiquette, they have horrible morals. And there's another person that seems very average. They're not unattractive. They seem very average. And you sit with that person, you sit with them, within 10 minutes you're like, wow, this is an incredible person. And there's a difference between desire and attraction. And attraction is about the whole person, and desire is only one aspect to it. So if you want to be attractive to a person that you find attractive, if you want to be attractive in the sense of you want to be somebody, you want somebody with good morals, you want somebody with good character, you want somebody with good Islam, then be all that yourself, and then you will be attractive to that type of person. But, if you want to be, don't be like 30 and be like, I can't find any good ladies. By the way, you want to go to the club on Friday night, right? That's just not the way it works. The second most important thing is the most important thing to look for. This is one of the lessons of this, and in fact, we see this across the board with the marriages of the Sahaba and the marriages of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. There are two things that you really want to look for when you get married, and that is character and iman. Character and iman. This is the two most important things. What attracted Khadija anha to the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? It was her character. It was his character. And that character became the bedrock on which they built their family. And when the hardships came of the entire city turning against them, everybody going after them, it was the character of Khadija anha and the character of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam that sustained their entire life and their marriage and their life together. And you see that as well in the lives of the Sahaba, where it's the character of the two people that sustains them through thick and thin. So, advice number one, get off of Reddit, right? r/red pill, just take it off of your entire thing, right? And advice number two is work on your character. Work on your character. Because everything that is your money goes up and down. Your looks go up and down. Actually, just go down. It's like it goes up and then your situation in life goes up and down. your character is permanent. And your iman, if your iman is strong, your iman is permanent. Those are the two things that you want to base a relationship on. And the second and most important, another very important thing that's in this is shoot your shot, guys. Like dead shoot, like do it halal, right? Don't let them sliding into people's DMs. Hey, girl, you know. You know, I want to pray the hajjat with you. You know. Don't do it halal, right? No cheap Muslim pickup lines. But shoot your shot, guys. Because Khadija al-Anha is 40 years old. 40 years old, right? She's a widow. And there's this guy who everybody, like unanimous agreement, right? If there was going to be a vote for like prom king, right? Unanimous vote. Everybody loved him. Everybody thought the world of him. She shot her shot. And we're still talking about it. Right? So, seriously, shoot your shot, guys. And you do it respectfully, you do it properly, you do it well, and it don't work out, don't work out. You know? If it don't work out, and if you do it respectfully and well, there's no hard feelings, it's amicable as well. But you never know under which rock you will find happiness. You can imagine happiness is hidden under rocks on a beach. You never know which rock has your happiness unless you start turning. Right? So, shoot your shot. Say Bismillah. Right? Maybe you don't hit on the first, maybe you don't hit on the second. Right? But say Bismillah, have work on your character, work on the person you are, do it halal, do it Islamic, but don't be cowards. Dr. Sherman Jackson once said something very important. He said, Islam has no need for cowards. Islam has no need for cowards. And if you're too scared to shoot your shot with the sister in the MSA, okay, then Islam, you're just, like, what use are you going to be this month? Like, seriously, like, if you're too scared to shoot your shot to get married, what use are you going to be this month? So, just have tawakkul on Allah. And, you know, do it the right way, do it the best way, do it well, and inshallah everything will be good. That's I'm on a crusade now. Like, every time I see like a 22-year-old, I'm like, why are you not married? Because there's a marriage crisis in this community. There's a serious marriage crisis in this community. And the only way, what I found is that with a lot of young people, the reason why there's a marriage crisis is because, you know, like you get the aunties who go up to the beta, you're next, right? But that's it. That's all they do. Then they turn around, they walk away, and nobody talks to people about the fear, about the uncertainty, about the feeling confused, right? Like, these are all things that go into it. So I'm not here to pat you on the back and say, Beta, you're next. I'm here to tell you straight, like, nobody is going to work on your happiness if you don't do it. No one is going to facilitate your own happiness if you're not willing to have the courage to be happy. It takes courage to hope, courage to be happy, courage to pursue the thing that is not 100%. Have that courage. And may Allah bless and facilitate for everybody. Okay. now that I'm off of that soapbox, the last thing we're going to talk about, and we'll do it quickly in 10 minutes, and then we'll have question and answer. The hilf al-fudul, okay? And this is a very important thing for social justice. The hilf al-fudul it's a very dramatic story. It's a very dramatic story. So of course, Mecca is the center of commercial happening, right? It's like New York for the Arab world, for Jazirah al-Arab. But the problem is the whole society is divided into tribes. Okay, so like, you can think of tribes like gangs, because really that's what tribes are. They're like gangs, especially in this time where like there's nothing to like mediate between the tribes. So the tribes really just behave like gangs, and so you either have a gang, or if you're without a tribe, it's like a tourist walking down, gang warfare street and being like, "Hi guys, do you know which way the bathrooms are?" Right? You're gonna get mugged and no one knows anything about it. Cops aren't there. It's not gonna be a good time for you. So that's what Mecca was like. So there was this one merchant who came into Mecca, and he sells some stuff to a dude. He's like, "You know what? I'll pay you tomorrow." And he's like, "No, you gotta pay me now." I was like, "I will pay you tomorrow." So fine. Tomorrow comes, no payment. Next day comes, no payment. Right? And the guy eventually says, "I'm gonna pay you." And so this guy who's from out of town, right? He has no backup. He's got no squad. It's just him. And the other dude, he's embedded with the tribes of Mecca. Right? Ain't no way he's gonna get money out of him. So what does he do? He climbs to the top of a mountain near Mecca. There's a hill really, but we'll call it a mountain. He climbs to the top of this mountain, and he says, "O people of Mecca, is this what you've become? That people come from out of town and you rob them, and nobody's gonna do anything about it." And then he recites poetry, because of course he does, right? This is the Jahili Arabs. You're like, "How are you today?" Let me recite you some poetry. That's how. So he starts reciting poetry, and as he's reciting this poetry, people are gathering and listening to what he's saying, and they're feeling really ashamed of what's going on, because this is the really crazy thing, is that like you would think like the people in the worst, most violent areas of the world have no morals. But there is such a thing as honor amongst thieves. And you see this actually interestingly, like I was just at a training for peacemaking. And they talked about this, like, the people that you think are like the most violent people in the world, they'll have an honor code. And so he's appealing to their honor code, and they start feeling ashamed about their own honor code. And so what they do is they gather the leaders of Mecca into a house, and they come to an agreement that if anybody comes from out of town and he's robbed, or he's cheated, or his stuff is stolen, then it's going to be on each one of the elders of the tribes to advocate for him. And the Rasul ﷺ said, this was called the Hilf al-Fudul, and they gathered all of the leaders of the tribes into the house of one of their nobles. And the Rasul ﷺ said years later, and he's recounting the story himself, and he says he was very young at the time when it happened. He had just gotten married and whatnot. He said that if he is kicked out of Mecca at this point, when he's recounting the story, he's been kicked out of Mecca. He's been persecuted by the Meccans. He's been made war against. And he says that if they called me to Mecca to sign another pact like this, I would go. And if they called me to Mecca to sign another pact where we're going to protect each other's rights and protect the rights of people who have nobody to help them protect them, I would go and I would do it. It's a very important lesson for us. Very, very important lesson for us. There is no excuse for a Muslim. No excuse for a Muslim to not advocate for the rights and protections of people who are in vulnerable situations, in vulnerable circumstances. And in America, we have certain, there's a lot of very vulnerable people in America, right? You go to certain areas, even in DC, right? Just down the street. You go to the area, well, not really down the street, it takes like an hour to get there with traffic. But you go to DC, and there are whole neighborhoods where if somebody gets sick, they're over, right? They got no money. The closest hospitals are far away. Even if they go to the hospital and they come out, they got no money for the prescription. They got no money for the prescriptions. They got no money for anything. There are places. You remember what happened with the BLM marches in DC? The kinds of violence that was used against people to put them down. And what happened in Baltimore, right? Baltimore was a complete disaster. We have opportunities today for hilf al-fudul. We have opportunities today where we are being called to partake in advocating for the causes of people that are continuously wronged. And in America, that happens in two major ways. It happens by class, right? It happens by socioeconomic status, and it happens by race. These are the two main ways that it happens in America. The people who are poor are continuously pushed further and further into their poverty until they become desperate. And people who are of minority races, particularly African Americans, Latinos, are continuously, systematically discriminated against and pushed into that poverty. And that poverty is perpetuated on them. And the question that we have is, what is we as Muslims, what are we doing? Because this is our hilf al-fudul. Right? We had our own discrimination against us as Muslims as well. Right? We were policed. Our religion was criminalized. Our political speech was criminalized. Right? But the Rasul ﷺ is saying, after he's been kicked out of Mecca, after he's been discriminated against, after he's been persecuted, after he's been everything, he turns around and says, if I had to stand up for somebody else's rights, in my time I would do it. So the question for us is, what are we doing? This is not about, there's like vogue terms like intersectionality and blah, blah, blah. This is not about that. This is about our values. This is about applying our values. And our values are that when someone is wronged, when there is oppression, Muslims do not stay quiet. That's our values, right? In our belief, if a person has to choose between their daily bread and their medicine, that's not okay. If a person has to choose between their daily bread and taking care of their kids, that's not okay. That's our values. If a person is beaten and put down because they are rallying against oppression of continuous killing of their own people by people in authority, that's not okay. That's our values. And if we're being called to stand with people according to our values, we need to respond to that call. And that is the hilf al-fudul. That's the lesson of the hilf al-fudul. Right? So in this second part, we got two lessons. One, get married. Right? And get married to people, like focus on your character, focus on your iman, and look for somebody of character and iman. And the second is, when the call comes to stand for the justice, to stand for justice for people, is part of our values to respond to that. Okay, that's what we have for today's stories, inshallah.